You think modern royals are strange? Wait until you hear about the family so inbred. Their children were born with jaws they couldn't close, tongues too large to speak, and faces that barely resembled humans. One child's head was so deformed, the midwives screamed when they saw him. A royal bloodline so obsessed with purity, they ended up breeding their own extinction. This isn't fiction. This is the true story of the Habsburg dynasty, and by the end of this video you'll understand how a royal obsession with bloodlines led to one of the most horrifying genetic collapses in history. Forget fairy tales. This royal family story ends with madness, deformity, and a crown that couldn't hide the monster beneath. Comment below. Would you rather have power or freedom from a cursed family name? The Habsburgs ruled over much of Europe for centuries. Spain, Austria, Hungary, the Holy Roman Empire. Their name was etched into history like a warning. Their dynasty spanned nearly 700 years, but it wasn't their politics that left the biggest mark. It was their faces. The Habsburgs were obsessed with keeping their bloodline pure. They didn't just marry cousins, they married first cousins, over and over, sometimes uncle to niece. In one case, they married their own niece twice removed. This wasn't an accident, it was a strategy, a twisted one. They believed keeping royal blood untouched by outsiders would protect their power. But they weren't just guarding their throne, they were sealing their fate. By the 16th and 17th centuries, their family tree looked more like a vine twisting in on itself. It had fewer and fewer branches, and the fruit it bore was disturbing. Now here's where it gets grim. If you've ever seen portraits of Habsburg royalty, you might have noticed something off. Elongated faces, bulging lower lips, jaws that stuck out far beyond the upper lip, giving them a permanent slack-jawed look. This wasn't bad art. It was real. It's called mandibular prognathism, a genetic condition. Most famously, it became known as the Habsburg jaw. The deformity made it hard to chew, swallow, or even speak properly. And it wasn't just the jaw. The Habsburgs often had misshapen skulls, oversized tongues, and unusually large noses. Charles II of Spain, the final Habsburg king of the Spanish line, was the worst case. His jaw was so misaligned he couldn't chew solid food. His tongue was so large he spoke with a slur. His head was so misshapen it had to be held upright with support as a child. Imagine being king, but unable to eat or talk clearly without people wincing. And yet he ruled. Not because he was capable, but because he was born into a family that chose bloodline over biology, again and again. Let's talk about Charles II, the man who should have never made it past infancy. His parents were uncle and niece, which meant he had more genetic similarity than if his parents had been siblings. Here's the brutal truth. Charles II was mentally and physically disabled from birth. He couldn't walk properly until age 4, couldn't talk until nearly age 8. He drooled constantly. His skin was pale and clammy. He had seizures, memory loss, and episodes of rage followed by long periods of silence. By adulthood, he was impotent and possibly sterile. He was king of Spain, one of the most powerful empires in Europe, and yet he was little more than a prisoner in his own body. His courtiers called him El Hechizado, the bewitched one. Some thought he was cursed by witches, others blamed demons. But the truth was simpler and sadder. His ancestors had intermarried so many times that his inbreeding coefficient, the measure of genetic overlap, was over 25%. That's higher than the theoretical offspring of a brother and sister. This was the result of centuries of royal marriages within the same small gene pool. The result wasn't just a sickly king, it was a crumbling empire. While the men of the family got the attention, the women suffered just as much, and silently. Many of them were married off as teens to uncles or cousins they'd never met. They had no choice. Producing heirs was their duty and often their death sentence. Maria Anna of Spain married her own uncle, Ferdinand III of Austria. She died at 39 after a lifetime of miscarriages and difficult pregnancies. Her daughter followed the same fate, married off to another cousin and dead by 30. Generations of royal women lived short, painful lives. Reproductive problems, birth defects, infant deaths, all swept under the royal carpet in the name of duty. These were girls raised in gold cages, bred like livestock, and discarded if they failed to produce a healthy heir. But healthy wasn't on the Habsburg menu. By the late 1600s, the Spanish Habsburgs were falling apart, literally and politically. Charles II, the inbred king, had no children. He tried. He married twice. But his body was too broken. His doctors even checked his semen under primitive microscopes. The reports? Lifeless, watery, without strength. Without an heir, Spain faced a crisis. Who would rule next? Other nations waited like vultures. Charles II died in 1700. His death was slow, grotesque, and in many ways symbolic. His autopsy revealed he had no blood, a deformed heart, a head full of water, and intestines rotted. One doctor said it was as if his body had been dead for years before he actually died. With him, the Spanish Habsburg line ended. Centuries of obsessive inbreeding had led to a dead end. A man so deformed and dysfunctional, he couldn't even keep the dynasty alive. Let's be clear, inbreeding isn't just about weird family trees. It has real, devastating consequences. Increased risk of birth defects, weakened immune systems, higher chance of developmental disorders, recessive diseases that get magnified generation after generation. The Habsburgs didn't understand genetics, but they believed they were divine, chosen by God. Their blood was sacred. The irony? That belief destroyed them from the inside out. One study found that the more inbred a Habsburg monarch was, the shorter their lifespan. Charles II wasn't an outlier, he was the endpoint. Art historians used to think royal portraits were exaggerated or symbolic. But the Habsburg portraits, they're painfully accurate. If you look at paintings from the 1500s through 1700s, you'll see the evolution or devolution of the Habsburg face. From slightly prominent jaws to full-blown deformity, artists were paid to flatter royals. But when the deformities were this obvious, they couldn't paint around them. Even flattering art couldn't hide the truth. The portraits don't lie. The jaw, the lips, the eyes, they tell a story more honest than any royal decree. The Habsburgs aren't the only royal family to fall for the lie of blood purity. Egyptian pharaohs, Hawaiian monarchs, and even 19th century European dynasties all practiced forms of incest or extreme intermarriage. But the Habsburgs stand out for how long and how hard they committed to the illusion. They believed royal blood couldn't be tainted, even as their children came out deformed, diseased, and dying young. Their quest for perfection bred chaos, their desire for power bred weakness, and their insistence on legacy bred tragedy. Today, the Habsburg name still exists, barely. The current descendants are private citizens. Some have even undergone surgery to correct the genetic deformities that lingered for generations. But the damage was done. What they left behind wasn't just a crumbling dynasty or a library of creepy portraits. They left a warning. When power becomes obsession and tradition becomes doctrine, humans suffer. They could have opened their gates, married outside the castle walls, chosen love over politics, but they didn't. And in doing so, they turned their own family into a biological experiment gone horribly wrong. The Habsburgs ruled empires, commanded armies, and dictated laws. But for all their power, they couldn't outrun genetics. They built a dynasty so tightly wound around itself that it collapsed under its own weight. In the end, the royal blood they protected became the very thing that destroyed them. The faces in the portraits aren't just strange. They're warnings in oil and canvas, a gallery of silent screams frozen in time. So the next time you hear someone speak of noble blood or royal lineage, remember this. Even kings can rot from the inside out. If this story disturbed you, subscribe, because history is darker, stranger, and more twisted than they ever told you in school. And we're just getting started.